Dinner at our place had a way of feeling like a sitcom. Loud, messy, but warm. Mom and Dad took their usual spots at the head and foot of the table, while Sheldon and I sat across from each other. The room was filled with the smell of garlic bread and spaghetti sauce, the kind of familiar meal that made me feel like a teenager again. Sheldon was in a particularly good mood, cracking jokes between bites, his fork spinning spaghetti like a pro. I don't know when I started noticing his laugh, more or the way his voice had deepened over the years, but tonight it was like everything about him was impossible to ignore. He caught me staring at him once, mid-laugh. "What?" he asked, his grin playful but curious. "Nothing," I mumbled, looking down at my plate. But it wasn't nothing. It was never just nothing anymore. "So," Dad said, breaking the comfortable hum of chewing and clinking utensils. "I've been thinking about this for a while now, and I'm gonna say it. You two need to hit the gym." Sheldon and I exchanged a look, his eyebrows shooting up in mock surprise. "The gym?" he echoed, like the word itself was foreign. "Yes, the gym," Dad said firmly. "It's good for you. Builds strength, discipline, confidence. You're young, you should take advantage of it." Mom jumped in as usual. "And it's not all about weights. They've got classes, swimming and yoga. It's a nice place to get out of the house too." I smirked, leaning back in my chair. "You've been trying to convince me to do this since I was 16. Why now?" Dad shrugged. "Well, now there are two of you. Sheldon could use it, and maybe you'll stick with it if you go together." Sheldon nearly choked on his breadstick, laughing. "Why am I getting dragged into this?" "Because," Dad said, pointing at him with his fork, "you've been slouching around here too much lately. You need to get out, be active, meet people." I rolled my eyes. "So what, you think we're going to become gym rats overnight?" "It's worth a try," Dad replied, unfazed. Sheldon looked at me, and there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Excitement, maybe. Curiosity. Whatever it was, it made my stomach flip. Honestly, it doesn't sound that bad. I've been thinking about working out anyway. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? Since when?" He shrugged, that casual, almost cocky way he'd picked up recently. "Dunno, just seems like a good idea. Besides, don't you always complain about wanting to get in shape?" "Wow, okay. Way to throw me under the bus," I said, pretending to be offended. "Hey, I'm just saying," he teased, his grin wide and unbothered. Mom and Dad laughed, clearly enjoying the back and forth. But I wasn't laughing. Not really. Something about the way he looked at me, so confident, so grown up, made me feel off balance. "All right," I said, crossing my arms. "Fine. If you're in, I'm in." Sheldon's face lit up, his grin softening into something almost boyish. For a moment, it reminded me of when he was 6 and used to beg me to play with him after school. Back then, it was hide and seek or building pillow forts in the living room. Now it was gym memberships and adult responsibilities. "Great," Dad said, clapping his hands. "I'll set you both up with guest passes for the first week. Maybe you'll actually stick with it this time." "Doubt it," I muttered, though I couldn't help smiling a little. Sheldon leaned back in his chair, his plate empty. "Don't worry, Bella. I'll keep you motivated." The way he said it, so casual, almost teasing, shouldn't have made my heart skip the way it did. But it did. After dinner, while we were clearing the table, Sheldon bumped me lightly with his shoulder. "So gym buddies, huh?" I laughed, keeping my tone light. "Don't get any ideas." He smirked, leaning in just a little too close. "Who, me? Never." There was something in his voice, though, something playful but layered, like there was more he wasn't saying. I felt my face heat up and busied myself with stacking plates. As he walked away, I caught myself watching him again. He moved with a confidence that was new but familiar, like he was growing into the person he was always meant to be. And for the first time, I let myself wonder, what would it be like to really know him? Not as the kid I grew up with, but as the man he was becoming. It was a dangerous thought, one I had no business thinking. But I thought it anyway. The next day felt like a test, though I wasn't exactly sure of what. Sheldon and I were headed to the gym, and while the idea had seemed harmless enough at dinner, now that it was happening, I was overthinking everything. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do there, I admitted as we pulled into the parking lot. My nerves felt out of place, almost childish, but they were there all the same. Sheldon glanced at me from the driver's seat, his expression calm and almost amused. "You'll be fine, Bella. It's not that serious. We'll figure it out together." He had a way of sounding so sure, like he already knew everything was going to work out. It was annoying and comforting all at once. Inside, the gym smelled faintly of rubber and cleaning spray. It was bright, full of shiny machines, racks of weights, and people who all seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Sheldon handed me a guest pass and pointed toward the locker rooms. "Meet you out there," he said, flashing me a quick grin before disappearing through the men's door. In the women's locker room, I changed into leggings and a tank top, pulling my hair into a ponytail that already felt like it was going to come loose. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the awkwardness. It was just a gym. No big deal. When I stepped into the main gym area, I wandered aimlessly for a bit, pretending to stretch as I scoped the place out. A few minutes later, Sheldon walked out from the men's locker room, and my brain short-circuited. I don't know what I was expecting, probably the same guy I always saw lounging on the couch or mowing the lawn in old sneakers. But this was something else. His t-shirt fit snugly across his chest and arms, hinting at muscle definition I hadn't realized he had. His shoulders were broad, his posture confident, and his natural tan seemed to catch the light in a way that made him look, well, kind of perfect. There wasn't an ounce of fat on him, just lean muscle and a quiet, effortless strength. He looked so natural in his body, like he hadn't even tried, which somehow made it even more unfair. I couldn't stop staring. "You good?" he asked, catching me mid-gawk as he walked over. "Yeah," I said quickly, though my voice came out higher than I'd intended. I looked away, pretending to adjust my ponytail. Just warming up. He didn't press me on it, which was both a relief and a disappointment. The rest of the session was a blur. Sheldon took the lead, showing me how to adjust machines, what weights to start with, and reminding me to breathe through each movement. He was patient and encouraging, his voice calm and steady in my ear. But I couldn't focus. Not really. Every time he bent down to grab a weight or reached up to adjust a bar, I found myself watching the way his muscles moved under his skin, the way his shirt clung to his back. It wasn't just that he looked good. It was the way he carried himself, so sure and so at ease. It was like he was completely in control, and I couldn't get enough of it. By the time we left the gym, my legs were sore, and my brain was scrambled. He drove us home, talking about protein shakes and workout plans, but I barely heard him. All I could think about was the way he looked, the way he smiled at me, and the strange, unwelcome feeling blooming in my chest. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I couldn't get Sheldon out of my head, his laugh, his voice, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The way he'd looked at me earlier, not as his sister, not as some girl he grew up with, but as someone else entirely. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. But it was there. Before I knew it, I was out of bed, my bare feet padding softly down the hall. I didn't have a plan. I barely had a thought in my head as I pushed open his door. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of moonlight spilling through the window. Sheldon was lying on his side, his breathing slow and even. For a moment, I just stood there watching him. His face was so peaceful, so unguarded, and something inside me ached. I stepped closer, drawn to him like a magnet. The faint scent of his skin, clean, warm, and familiar, hit me, and my head spun. Before I could think better of it, I climbed into his bed, lying down beside him. He stirred, his body tensing for a split second before relaxing again. "Bella," he murmured, his voice groggy with sleep. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He turned slightly, just enough to face me. His eyes searched mine in the dim light, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" "I don't know," I admitted, the words trembling on my lips. I couldn't stop thinking about you." For a moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, hesitantly, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. "Stay," he said softly. And so I did. The room felt like it was holding its breath, the silence stretching out in a way that made every little sound feel louder. His breathing, the soft rustle of the sheets, even the faint hum of the world outside. But all of that faded into the background as I lay there next to him, my heart beating wildly in my chest. The heat between us wasn't just in my imagination anymore. It was real, tangible, growing with every second that passed. I tried to focus on anything else, on the faint pattern of moonlight spilling across the wall, on the coolness of the pillow beneath my head, but it was useless. Every fiber of my being was attuned to him. I could feel his body moving slightly with each breath, the slow rise and fall of his chest, the warmth radiating from his skin, even though we weren't quite touching. It was intoxicating, overwhelming in a way that left me almost dizzy. "Bella," he whispered, breaking the tension in the quietest of ways. His voice was low and soft, laced with something I couldn't quite place. Curiosity, maybe? Or was it something deeper? What's going on?" I turned my head to face him, and for the first time, I let myself really look at him. His features were softened by the dim light, but his eyes were sharp, focused, searching mine like they held all the answers he was looking for. "I don't know," I admitted, the words catching in my throat. It wasn't a lie. I really didn't know how to explain what I was feeling, why I had come to him like this, why I couldn't seem to leave. But then the truth slipped out before I could stop it. I feel something for you, Sheldon. Something strong." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and frantic, as I waited for him to respond. I braced myself for rejection, for confusion, for him to tell me I was crazy. But when he finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady, like he had already thought this through 100 times. "I know what you mean," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. I felt it too, for a while now. His words hit me like a bolt of lightning, and suddenly everything felt too big, too intense to contain. The tension that had been building between us, simmering just beneath the surface for God knows how long, finally boiled over. I couldn't hold back anymore. I moved closer to him, my body acting on instinct. The space between us disappeared, and I felt the heat of his skin against mine. My heart was racing so fast it was almost painful, but I didn't care. All I could think about was him, his scent, his warmth, the way his eyes never left mine. His hand brushed against my arm, tentative at first, like he wasn't sure if this was okay. But when I didn't pull away, he grew bolder, his fingers tracing the length of my arm in a way that sent shivers down my spine. And then his lips were on my neck. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but the warmth of his breath against my skin made me melt. I closed my eyes, letting the sensation wash over me, and tilted my head slightly to give him more access. He took it as encouragement, his kisses trailing upward, slow and deliberate, until he reached my jaw. When his lips finally found mine, it was like everything else in the world disappeared. The kiss was tentative at first, like we were both testing the waters, but it didn't stay that way for long. It deepened quickly, growing more urgent with each passing second. His hands moved to my back, pulling me closer, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, holding onto him like he was the only thing keeping me grounded. My fingers found their way into his hair, and I marveled at how soft it was, how perfect everything about this moment felt. The kiss broke only when we were both out of breath, but the closeness remained. His forehead rested against mine, his hands still holding me firmly in place. "Bella," he murmured, his voice low and rough in a way that sent shivers through me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I pressed myself even closer to him, needing to feel him, to erase whatever distance still remained between us. We didn't finish with kissing. He had protection in his room. Everything that happened next was just incredible. I've never felt anything like this. The rest of the night passed in a haze of warmth and closeness. We didn't speak much. There was no need. Everything we needed to say was conveyed in the way our bodies moved together, in the way his hands traced slow, careful patterns along my back, in the way I clung to him like I was afraid he might disappear. At some point, I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. His fingers played absent-mindedly with a strand of my hair, and I let myself relax completely. My body sinking into his like we were two pieces of a puzzle that had finally clicked into place. "This feels surreal," I whispered after what felt like hours of silence. He didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I wondered if he had fallen asleep. But then his hand stilled in my hair, and he murmured, "Yeah, but it feels right, doesn't it?" It did. It felt more right than anything I'd ever known. By the time the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, I knew nothing between us would ever be the same again. And for the first time, that thought didn't scare me. Not at all. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was how warm and heavy Sheldon's arm felt draped across my waist. The second thing I noticed was how close we still were, our bodies tangled together like neither of us had wanted to let go during the night. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the early morning, and for a moment, I just lay there, trying to soak it all in. The way his breath brushed against my shoulder, the faint scent of him lingering on the sheets, the way the sunlight was just starting to filter through the curtains. But reality crept in quickly. The logical part of my brain reminded me that I was in his room, in his bed, and that if anyone in the house woke up and found us like this, well, I didn't want to think about what might happen. I slowly started to shift away from him, careful not to wake him, but the second I moved, he stirred. His arm tightened around me, pulling me back against him. "Where are you going?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "I should go back to my room," I whispered, even though the thought of leaving felt like a betrayal of everything that had happened between us. He opened one eye, his lips curving into a sleepy smile. "I'm not letting you go," he said, his voice still low and rough. I couldn't help but smile at the way he said it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Sheldon," I said, trying to sound stern, but failing miserably. "If my parents see us coming out of the same room, together, it's going to be weird. Really weird." He chuckled softly, his breath warm against my neck. "They won't. They don't come into our rooms, remember?" I glanced around the room, and my stomach did a small flip when I noticed the state of it. Our clothes were still scattered across the floor, an unmistakable trail of evidence leading from the bed. If anyone walked in now, there'd be no way to explain this away. "It's not just that," I said, lowering my voice, even though no one else could hear us. "What if they notice something's different?" He finally loosened his grip enough to let me sit up, though his hand still lingered on my arm. "Relax," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We'll just play it cool. No one has to know." Easier said than done. We eventually got up and dressed, trying not to make too much noise as we gathered our clothes and put the room back in order. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks the entire time, especially when I caught his eye and saw the small, knowing smile he was trying to hide. When we opened the door to leave, my heart nearly stopped. Mom was standing in the hallway, looking like she was heading to the kitchen for her morning coffee. "Oh, good morning," she said, her tone bright and casual. "Morning," I squeaked, my voice a little too high-pitched. "What were you two up to?" she asked, her gaze flicking between us. I froze, my mind racing for an explanation, but Sheldon didn't miss a beat. "Just playing games," he said smoothly. His tone so natural it made me want to hug him and shake him at the same time. "Yeah," I added quickly, hoping I didn't sound as nervous as I felt. We stayed up late playing games, lost track of time. Mom smiled and nodded, thankfully not pressing the issue, but I could feel the heat in my cheeks as we walked past her. I avoided looking back, afraid my face would give something away. In the bathroom, we both let out a breath we hadn't realized we were holding. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping it would help cool me down, but it didn't do much. "Nice save," I said quietly, glancing at him through the mirror. He grinned, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Told you no one would suspect anything." When we went downstairs for breakfast, the awkwardness only seemed to grow. Mom and Dad were already sitting at the table, chatting about their plans for the day. But the moment we joined them, the conversation turned to us. So Dad said, looking up from his coffee, "How was your first day at the gym?" I froze, my mind going blank. The truth was, I barely remembered anything about our workout. Every detail of the gym session had been overshadowed by how I felt seeing Sheldon in a whole new light. "It was good," I said, trying to sound casual. "Really good." "Yeah," Sheldon added, stepping in to save me again. "We'll definitely be sore today, though." I nodded quickly, hoping my parents couldn't see through me. My muscles were sore, but not for the reasons they thought. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to keep myself busy, but it was impossible to focus on anything for more than a few minutes. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, felt him. My thoughts kept drifting back to the night before, to the way he had held me, kissed me, looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. By the time evening rolled around, I was practically buzzing with anticipation. I kept waiting for him to find an excuse to sneak into my room, or for him to give me some kind of signal. But as the hours ticked by, nothing happened. I told myself it was fine, that maybe he needed some time to process everything. But deep down, I couldn't help feeling a little disappointed. When I finally climbed into bed, I stared up at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. Did last night mean as much to him as it did to me? Was he having second thoughts? Or was I just overthinking everything? The next day, as we drove to the gym, I found myself glancing at Sheldon more often than usual. He looked calm, focused, completely in his element, but I couldn't shake the nervous energy bubbling inside me. My thoughts kept circling back to the night we'd spent together, the way he'd held me like I was the most important thing in the world. I wasn't sure how to act around him now, what to say, how to navigate this new, unspoken thing between us. When we arrived, I tried to push all of that aside. I told myself I was here to work out, to get stronger, to focus on myself. But the moment I stepped into the gym and saw Sheldon settle into his routine like he belonged there, I couldn't concentrate. "Need help with anything?" he asked, catching me mid-stare. I nodded, grateful for the excuse to be near him. "Yeah, can you show me a couple of exercises? I want to make sure I'm doing them right." He smiled, that easy, confident smile that always made me feel like everything was going to be okay. Of course. We moved to a corner of the gym where it was quieter, less crowded. He showed me a few moves, patiently explaining the mechanics, correcting my form when needed. I tried to listen, I really did, but then came a particularly tricky exercise, one I just couldn't seem to get right. "Here," he said, stepping behind me. "Let me guide you." He reached out, his hands gently covering mine as he adjusted my grip. His voice was low, steady, but I barely heard a word. All I could focus on was the warmth of his touch, the way his body felt so close to mine, his breath brushing against my ear as he spoke. Time seemed to slow down. My heart raced, my skin tingling everywhere we made contact. It was like every nerve in my body was suddenly hyper-aware of him. He must have noticed something in the way I froze, the way my breathing hitched. His hands lingered just a moment longer than necessary before he let go and stepped back. But instead of resuming the exercise, he reached for my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Come with me," he said, his voice soft but leaving no room for argument. I didn't resist. I couldn't. He led me through the gym, weaving between equipment and other people until we reached a door in the back. I didn't even know where we were going, but I trusted him completely. When he pushed open the door, I realized we were in the shower area. The space was quiet, empty, the faint sound of running water echoing off the tiled walls. "This one hasn't worked in years," he said, motioning to a stall in the far corner. "No one ever comes here." Before I could process his words, he pulled me gently inside, closing the door behind us. The world outside faded away, leaving just the two of us in this small, enclosed space. He reached for me, his hands finding my waist, and I didn't hesitate. I leaned into him, my fingers brushing against the smooth planes of his chest as his lips found my neck. The first kiss was soft, tentative, but it didn't stay that way for long. His mouth moved against my skin with increasing urgency, trailing kisses from my collarbone to the hollow of my throat. My hand slid up to his shoulders, gripping him as if to anchor myself, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. His lips continued their descent, exploring every inch of me as if he was memorizing the map of my body. I closed my eyes, letting myself get lost in the sensation, the heat of his breath, the roughness of his stubble against my skin, the way his hands moved with a perfect balance of strength and gentleness. At some point, we started to undress little by little. I traced the lines of his back, marveling at the strength I felt beneath my fingertips. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word made my pulse race faster. It was overwhelming in the best way, a whirlwind of sensations that left me breathless. He lifted me up, I wrapped my legs around his back, and we continued. Hours seemed to pass in a blur. Time no longer felt linear. It stretched and folded, each moment bleeding into the next. We were lost in each other, the rest of the world forgotten. When we finally pulled apart, our breaths came in ragged gasps. Our bodies pressed together as if the space between us didn't exist. "Bella," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. I looked up at him, my heart still pounding, and saw the same intensity in his eyes that I felt in my chest. I didn't need words to understand what he was feeling. It was written all over his face. We stayed there for a while, holding on to each other as the world slowly began to creep back in. But even as we left the stall and stepped back into the gym, I knew something had shifted between us. This wasn't just a moment, a fleeting spark. It was something deeper, something that had been building for years without either of us realizing it. So, and after everything that happened, Sheldon and I decided to take this step together. We knew it wouldn't be easy, keeping everything a secret, hiding what was between us from everyone, pretending things were the same when they were anything but. But somehow, we both knew it was worth it. No matter how difficult the path would be, we were going to walk it together. There's something about knowing that, no matter the odds, you're not alone in this. That was the one thing I was sure of. It's been a roller coaster, to say the least, and it's only just begun. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. Anyway, thank you for listening to my story. It's been a lot to share, but I needed to get it off my chest. I'm curious, how do you feel about all this? Does it make you see things a little differently? I don't know. I guess I just wanted to know what you think.